phone to ask a question. I would like to inform all parties that this call is being recorded, and if you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the call over to Ms. Beth Matfeld. Thank you, ma'am. You may begin.
Thank you, Stacy. Welcome to SAMHSA's webinar series, Methamphetamine, a webinar series dedicated to promoting public health, partnerships, and safety for critically affected populations. Today's topic, a targeted review of methamphetamine technical resources and activities related to Native Americans and drug courts, will review national resources provided by the National Methamphetamine Training and Technical Assistance Center. It will also address the challenges and solutions that many Native American communities are experiencing related to meth. In addition, we will address the nation's drug court systems. Before we continue, I'd like to go over a few details that might be helpful. We'll be holding general questions until the end at a general question and answer session. However, due to the tight schedule of our first speaker, Dr. Rick Rossin, we will pause at the end of his presentation to answer any questions directly related to meth and drug courts. As I indicated, Dr. Rossin will not be able to remain on the line with us, so if you do have questions specific to drug courts or his presentation, please make sure that you're prepared to ask those questions directly following his presentation. At which time the operator will review how to do that using your touch-tone phone, and we will take those questions and then follow those questions with the rest of the presentations for today. Opening our webinar today is Dr. Ed Kraft. Dr. Kraft?
Thank you, Beth. As the Government Project Officer for SAMHSA's National Meth Summit and the Meth Lead for the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA, I'd like to welcome you to the last webinar in this series, Methamphetamine, a webinar series to promote public health, partnerships, and safety for critically affected populations. Since this is the last webinar of this series, I would particularly like to take a moment and thank my colleagues from Strategic Applications International, Jim Koppel, Beth Matfeld, and Serafina Mesa for their tremendous efforts in helping to make this webinar series possible. I would also like to thank all of the speakers not only on today's call, but on the previous webinars. We've had some excellent presentations, and I think it has helped benefit states and communities with their methamphetamine needs. Today's webinar focuses on a targeted review of methamphetamine technical resources and activities related to Native Americans and drug courts. We know that states, communities, and tribal organizations can always use additional resources. We know that there are tremendous challenges that Native Americans are facing regarding meth, and we know that drug courts in many cases have proven to be effective sources of treatment and provided positive outcomes for meth users. So we are going to have some excellent presentations today, and rather than me ramble on, I'd like to get straight to our expert speakers. So please let me now introduce Jim Koppel, who will be introducing our speakers and facilitating the presentation portion of our webinar. Jim.
Thank you, Ed. We are very fortunate today to have an excellent panel of speakers and presenters that have been leaders in this field for a number of years. And our first speaker is Dr. Richard Rossin, who is one of the premier researchers and scholars on this topic and many other topics related to drug abuse and mental health in this country. He is the Associate Director of the UCLA Integrated Substance Abuse Programs and a professor in residence in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Science at UCLA School of Medicine. He has an extensive portfolio of research on methamphetamine, and from 1996 to 1999 was a member of the Federal Methamphetamine Advisory Group for ONDCP and Attorney General Janet Reno. He represented the U.S. in a UN conference on methamphetamine in Vienna, Austria in 2004, and during the past decade he has worked with NIDA, SAMHSA, and the U.S. State Department, the World Health Organization, and the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime on international substance abuse research and training projects, exporting U.S. technology and addiction science throughout the world. He's published over 3 books and 30 book chapters. As I said, he is a national expert and a leading scholar in this field. Rick, it's really our privilege to have you a part of this webinar today, and I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of this, and thank Jim and Ed for their invitations. And assuming I can manage to navigate the webinar, I think we'll be in good shape. Just a couple introductory remarks. I'm going to cover some material on some of the current knowledge of treatment of methamphetamine use disorders because the current information we have on how to treat patients with these disorders has a considerable amount of information has been developed in the last 25 years and applies to all the populations. Now, that doesn't mean that all of these techniques work with all populations, and it certainly is assumed that all of the techniques I'm going to talk about have to be adjusted for each of the populations. There hasn't been a lot of specific research done on specific treatments for specific populations, including Native American populations and drug courts, but I'll give a general overview of some of the treatment materials, and then hopefully as we go through the rest of the webinar, other speakers will be able to address some of the specific needs of the Native American population as well as some of the drug court issues. I started seeing meth users in the early 1980s and over the last 30 years have watched this problem expand from a West Coast problem to a national problem. Well, one of the things I saw when we started working with meth users was a real concern about whether or not they were amenable to treatment. And as I've done talks across the country over the last 30 years, I've heard in many places great concerns about whether or not meth users are treatable or whether they're treatable by our current strategies. We do have data on that now, and it has I think reassures us to the fact that we have not only do meth users respond to treatment as well as many of our other populations, but many of the treatments we've developed appear to be quite effective with meth users. So I will start into the slides. And as soon as, can someone instruct me again how to make the slides advance?
Yes, you should see down at the bottom there's an arrow, and you should be able, down on the left-hand side, you should be able to advance using those arrows.
Okay.
Bottom left-hand corner.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Thanks very much. The first thing I just want to briefly cover is whether or not meth users do respond differently, because literally in many of the parts of the United States and Canada and other places where I've done talks on methamphetamine, one of the things I've often heard is that as communities tried to grapple with the problem of meth, they felt that the treatments they were providing didn't work. And in some cases, we saw situations where meth users were excluded from treatment. I remember one particular visit I made to part of the United States where they were excluding meth users from drug courts because they felt it was a waste of money and that meth users didn't respond to treatment. Well, that's inaccurate. The data are quite clear. We did a study in the late 1980s where we compared meth users with cocaine users in a treatment program here in Southern California. We gave them exactly the same treatment over the same time period by the same staff. We treated 500 meth users and about 225 cocaine users, and we found identical results. That is, they were retained in treatment, their drug use during treatment was the same, their outcomes at 1 year, their incarceration rates, their employment rates were identical, and there was really a remarkably consistent treatment response for those two populations. Similarly, a few years later, Jim Sorensen and his colleague Amy Copeland looked at the treatment programs in San Francisco where they compared their cocaine use population with all the other, with the cocaine and meth use populations in their treatment programs. They found that all the data that they could find on this showed very comparable treatment response. Similarly, in the state of Washington, Bill Luchansky, Annette Krupski, and Kent Stark looked at their data from their treatment system in the state of Washington and found that meth users, cocaine, and opiate users had virtually identical response using basic community treatment although they did find that marijuana and alcohol users had somewhat more positive response. But clearly that there was no indication in any of these data that meth users were more difficult to treat or impossible to treat. Now, there are some clinical issues, and I'll talk about those as we go through, specific issues that are important to address with meth users, but I think the idea that they can't be treated in community treatment programs is incorrect, and that they do respond quite effectively to these treatments. So we're currently looking at meth use treatment as being along the same degree of effectiveness as treatment for our other substance use disorders. Now, in developing treatments, we have a couple of different general strategies. One are the behavioral treatments, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but there's been great interest in trying to develop medications. We know that methamphetamine damages the brain. We know that it produces changes in neurotransmitter systems, and that those changes, for the most part, recover over time, but they take a long time. The recovery period from meth use and some of the cognitive measures and some of the measures of affective state appear to take months to recover. There's been tremendous interest in trying to find medications that could speed the healing of the brain or help the brain function more quickly. Because as we try to treat people with behavioral treatments, one of the assumptions is they can remember the material that we're using to treat them with. And we do know that meth produces cognitive damage and other damage to other parts of the brain, and that probably impairs their ability to learn that information. So the focus has been on trying to develop medications that allow patients in early meth recovery to start functioning better more quickly. At the present time, we're still in a relatively early stage of identifying these medications. The one medication that we have developed that has some evidence of efficacy is bupropion, or also known as Wellbutrin or Zyban. It's used for the treatment of depression and cigarette smoking. This is a medication that does seem to have some evidence of efficacy in a study that was published in 2007. That study is now being replicated to make sure we do have a clear finding. But as of the present time, there really are no medications that have very well-established efficacy. We don't have anything like methadone or buprenorphine or naltrexone for the treatment of methamphetamine disorders, unfortunately. So our current major strategies are the behavioral treatments that have been developed. Now, which of those treatments have been developed have evidence of efficacy? Well, first, I'd like to argue that because of the comparability of the treatment response of methamphetamine and cocaine users, we think that the response that all the research done on the development of behavioral treatments for cocaine dependence should be applied to the meth-using population. And when you look at the literature for the treatment of cocaine dependence, these are some of the treatments that have been shown to be efficacious with multiple clinical trials. And I won't go through all these in detail. SAMHSA has manuals on these, and so does NIDA on the treatments of cognitive behavioral therapy, the community reinforcement approach, contingency management, and 12-step facilitation. These are treatments that have been developed and tested with cocaine users, but given the fact that our data suggests that cocaine and meth users respond similarly to these behavioral treatments, we could argue that these treatments certainly are ones that have good evidence of support for the treatment of people with stimulant use disorders. Now, specifically for methamphetamine, we've got 3 treatments that have been tested for with meth-using populations and which have clear evidence of effectiveness. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the first one and the one that's probably been used the most extensively. CBT, as many of you probably know, is a form of treatment that teaches patients and coaches patients on learning new skills for how to stay sober and how to prevent relapse. The treatment process itself is a form of coaching and mentoring. The therapist provides a lot of reinforcement. The big issue with meth treatment, as with cocaine and many of our substance use disorders, the biggest issue is retaining people in treatment. And cognitive behavioral therapy can be a very useful tool in helping to sustain people in treatment. Now, that being said, as I just mentioned, meth users have some deficits in their cognitive abilities. And so it's important, as this technique is used, that it's used in a very clear way, that people aren't flooded with too much information, and that the therapist moves through at a pace that allows the patient to understand the material and begin to apply it. But there are a number of manuals that have been developed on cognitive behavioral therapy. Kathy Carroll developed one that's published by NIDA, and there's a variety of other ones that if you Google cognitive behavioral therapy that are available. It can be developed and delivered in individual settings, in group settings, and is a very flexible tool to be used as part of meth treatment. Another technique which has very, very strong evidence of support is a technique called contingency management, or motivational incentives. This is a technique that's used to provide patients with clear rewards, reinforcers for certain behaviors. For example, one of the desired behaviors that's often expected in treatment is giving drug-free urine samples. And one of the common paradigms has been to provide people with vouchers and small rewards for their ability to both be retained in treatment and to provide drug-free samples. This is a very powerful technique. Of all the ones I'm going to talk about, this is the one that has by far the best evidence in it. And it's not to be used as a standalone treatment. It's a technique that is used with other techniques and is particularly useful at helping retain people in treatment over an extended period of time. This is just some data from one of the studies we did where we were comparing cognitive behavioral therapy with contingency management and a combination of the two. And what we're looking at here are stimulant-free urine samples, and you can see the two groups that receive contingency management show better performance than just cognitive behavioral therapy alone, although in a previous study we'd shown cognitive behavioral therapy is better than a control condition. Another approach that we've been involved with for the last 20 years is something called the matrix model, which is a combination therapy. Involves individual counseling, CBT, motivational interviewing. We've now integrated some positive reinforcement. Let me back up for a minute. Let me put that on hold for a minute and go back to contingency management. There are some tools. SAMHSA and NIDA have developed something called the PAMI product. It's something you can get from either NIDA or SAMHSA that has a set of materials on how to use motivational incentives or contingency management and how to go about applying these within your treatment setting. And it's a very useful set of resources and information. Okay, back to the matrix materials. So these are the components. There's families involved, urine testing, 12-step participation. It's a whole package. It's been manualized. SAMHSA provides it. You can see it on the SAMHSA website, and it's been used extensively now with tens of thousands of meth users in the United States and outside the United States. Here's some data from in a SAMHSA-funded study that we did in the earlier this decade, where we looked at these are the drug samples that were collected over the course of a comparison between the matrix approach and treatment as usual in 8 sites in the western United States. In all the sites except one, we saw the matrix approach produce more drug-free samples, and we have other measures where it showed superior performance during treatment. So this is a technique, this package of techniques that can be useful in working with meth users. And the materials can be adapted in a variety of ways to be used to fit a particular treatment center's needs. And again, that manual is available at SAMHSA at no cost. We were interested in drug courts. Here in California, we've seen in the last decade some claims made that meth users need special treatment and that maybe they don't respond that well in drug court treatment. We've looked at a couple of drug courts over the course of extended period of time, and we found that meth users, it always has seemed to me, if drug courts hadn't already been invented, they would have need to have been invented for the meth problem, because it's I think, an optimal match of a treatment structure that is the drug court, the extended period of time, the high degree of accountability. That framework is an absolutely optimal framework for treating meth users who are not thinking clearly, who have trouble following through, who need to have this extended involvement in treatment. And I think the drug court model has been extremely effective in working with meth users. Here's just some data on the fact that these patients in drug court, these are just routine drug courts, one in San Bernardino County and one in Northern California, where drug use rates in those drug courts are relatively low. We did a study in our large SAMHSA-funded study where we looked at one site that we had in our 8 sites that was a drug court site, and the rest of the sites were patients who were voluntarily in treatment, not under a drug court mandate. And the thought was that probably the drug court people would do more poorly because they were, quote unquote, less motivated, and that they were being forced into treatment, so that they probably would have poorer outcomes than the voluntary patients. What we found was exactly the opposite, that the drug court patients, when we looked at their treatment course from baseline to discharge to 6 months, in the slide that's there now, you're looking at the change in meth use over time among drug court and non-drug court participants. And you see, although the non-drug court participants reported somewhat more meth use at admission, and we're not sure how accurate that is, because people in drug court, when you admit them into the treatment, we think they tend to minimize their drug use. But this gives you on the y-axis is days of meth use in the previous 30, and you see that the rates of meth use at discharge 6 months and 1 year for the drug court sample are significantly lower than for the other sample. And that was reflected by urine test results as well as self-report. So we think that drug courts are a very effective framework for treating meth users, and that this is a practice that should be expanded in communities that have large meth problems. The next few slides are simply some of the critical clinical issues in the treatment of meth users that we think are important to address in treatment. I'll just sort of briefly mention them. And these are in no particular order of importance, but they are things that we've seen to be important in treatment. One of them is educating patients about their meth addiction. Stimulant users in general often have trouble recognizing that their drug use isn't simply something they do when they want to do it and that they're not really addicted. Because they often tend to say, well, I'm not like a heroin addict who has to use. I can stop when I want to, and I do stop, but then I go back. Part of their misunderstanding is that they don't understand the addiction to methamphetamine dependence. So one very useful component of treatment is the development of good information to educate both patients and their families about the reality of meth addiction. We think that providing information to them in different learning formats can be useful. Remember, if all we do is talk at them and give them cognitive information via verbal mechanisms, that part of their brain isn't working very well. So we've tried to come up with other alternative ways for getting the information across, using workbooks, using pictures, using videos to try to communicate to people so that you're not just giving them lots and lots of words, because that's the part of their brain that's not working very well. We think that some strategies for helping them with affect regulation is important. As meth users go through recovery, they don't feel very good. They're often depressed and anxious and have difficulty sleeping. And so we think some of these strategies, we're currently doing a study looking at physical exercise, and we think that may have some real benefits to helping meth users feel better more quickly. These are not evidence-based strategies at this point, but we do think it's important. Sexual behavior is an important issue and is important to be discussed in treatment, and has to be done in a very professional way because it's such a sensitive issue, but sexual behavior with meth use is a very commonly entangled behavior. And the issue of retention just comes back over and over again. Strategies that enhance retention, things like Niatex that have been promoted by SAMHSA, are extremely helpful in making meth treatment work and retaining people in treatment over time. Now, I just wanted to briefly mention that this is a slide from Tom McClellan, that this issue of understanding addiction treatment as a chronic disorder, or addiction treatment as a chronic process, because this is not an accurate portrayal of addiction. Addiction isn't a disorder where you put somebody in a box and you fix them. It's a disorder where you need to move people through levels of care, as drug courts especially have been developed to do, and develop an ongoing continuing care program. The continuing care has been something that's not been well developed in the U.S. treatment system and is an area of great importance to sustain the recovery after the acute treatment has been delivered. So the real focus in the development of this chronic model is on developing strategies that enhance moving people into long-term recovery. Finally, I just want to say that part of treatment that's an important component as we try to improve treatment is measuring the performance of treatment. As people deliver treatment, it's important to keep track of what works, what doesn't work, how well it works, and when you make modifications in treatment, to be able to have some data to speak to what the changes are that make treatment more effective. In summary, we have behavioral treatments. We're still working on developing medications, but meth users clearly do respond to treatment effectively, drug court being one of the most effective of these strategies. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rothman. Stacy, would you open the lines for questions, please?
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1, unmute your phone, and record your name clearly when prompted. If you need to withdraw your question, press *2. Again, to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. It will take a few moments for the questions to register. Please stand by.
While we're waiting for those questions, I just wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, as the operator had stated in the beginning, and it will be available on methpedia.org. That's www.methpedia.org. I would say usually we are able to make those available within 5 days.
And I'm showing no questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Rick. We will move on to our next presenter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it. Our next presenter is Stephen Jewell, and Steve provides technical assistance and support of the National Methamphetamine Training and Technical Assistance Center. And Steve has served as the Deputy Director of Safe Streets Campaign in Pierce County, Washington for the past 3 years. And I must add or insert here that Safe Streets is one of the most effective coalitions in the country. It's been around for a number of years. It has great results and measurements. It truly is one of the finest coalitions doing kind of comprehensive work on drugs, youth gang violence in the community of Tacoma. It was formed in 1989 to build a civic involvement, strengthen community and institutional partnerships to create safe neighborhoods. Prior to coming to Safe Streets, Steve served for more than 27 years in law enforcement. As Deputy Chief of Investigations for the Washington State Patrol, he provided executive leadership over a broad scope for public safety service, including multi-agency narcotic task forces, organized crimes, and special weapons and tactics SWAT teams, conducting high-risk, clandestine lab entry investigation and mitigation. He served as chair of the Governor's Methamphetamine Coordination Committee, served as vice chair for the Governor's Council on Substance Abuse, and co-chair of the Washington State Homeland Security Committee and Washington State Sheriff's and Police Chiefs Intelligence Committee. We're really honored to have you here, Steve, to speak on behalf of the National Methamphetamine Training and Technical Assistance Center, a relatively new resource for our country dealing with this issue on developing comprehensive strategies. Welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and thank you for your kind introduction. I'm happy to be here. I wanted to thank you for Strategic Applications and for SAMHSA for sponsoring the webinar today. And from my perspective, from law enforcement for the majority of my career, now turning to the field of prevention and related intervention work, this has been really a positive change to expand my sphere of influence and capacity to help work with our communities. And I've been pleased to work with the National Meth Center to be a resource not only for the state of Washington, but throughout the nation as we've been building our capacity as a resource. And it wasn't too many years ago, back in the early 90s, I can remember working as an officer where in 1992 we only had 32 labs here, clandestine labs here in the Washington State, and grew to as many as 2,000 by the year 2001, and through a number of strategies, multidisciplinary strategies, through treatment, prevention, law enforcement, we've been able to bring that down to a much lower number here, less than 200 here in 2009, and we hope to bring that same capacity to those stakeholders that are listening across the nation. And our website, which has been being developed here for the last 2 to 3 years, is a resource that can bring law enforcement, treatment professionals, prevention groups, the information they need to drill down into what is going on that can help them in their local experience. And a key piece of that is just our capacity to mobilize all the entities that are working on the professional level, as well as the communities, the residents, the schools, the businesses that are confronted with the problem and are looking for help, looking for common sense resources, common sense tools that they may not be aware of. So it's a twofold purpose for professionals as well as those impacted by methamphetamine. And so that we don't lose sight of the fact that, like Dr. Dawson was saying, this is about people. And there was a myth years ago of how intractable the treatment of methamphetamine was and how there may not be an opportunity for recovery for some. But like this young woman here, Pia, she's now leading a life of productive life in her community after a severe meth addiction over a number of years prior to seeking treatment. And so when you go on, when users go onto our website, they'll see it's made for and presented in common language, so that while Dr. Dawson and many other academic professionals can drill down into their field of expertise, that's the kind of information we're translating into usable information to make that available for those confronted with methamphetamine. And so kind of like the Google information system that might show as many as if you were to inquire methamphetamine On Google, you find over 15 million hits, but we filter that down into the usable information that has the best evidence for being effective in communities, so that users aren't having to search across too many different fields of information. So here's a quick overview. When you go to our website, you'll see it gives you an opportunity to look at the latest news events, as well as drill down into other areas of interest, whether it's prevention, recovery, enforcement, and so forth. And one aspect of that is being able to sign up for a daily news alert to bring you the latest information that's coming up in the news. And further review of the web pages will provide information for recovery, enforcement, drug and endangered children protocols, and et cetera, so that you're seeing what are effective and authoritative voices speaking to the issue. A little more detail as you look into meth resources across the nation. What are the opportunities for training materials that can be sent to you or available to the online, or for training conferences that might be able to come to your area, or other conferences you might be able to visit. So a host of areas that are easily accessible. And by going to your own state, you can find that you can be more local in your review of local resources. So in this case, if you were to go to Illinois, you would see the experience across the multidisciplinary information in the state, be it law enforcement issues, prevention and treatment, and avenues that might best help meet your particular local need for the state of interest. And there's also specific groups. We've been talking today about Native American experience in methamphetamine. That's an area we work with in respect to in Washington State, in partnering with tribes across the 26 tribal, recognized tribal entities in the state of Washington. We find that our local collaborations are involved in conversations and aspects of treatment, recovery, and enforcement that are involving the Native American tribes in our state, and we hope to see that same capacity be built across other states. Just so briefly, you all probably might know that the Native American experience is almost double the usage in relationship to population for other ethnicities. Almost twice, well over twice the Caucasian usage rate. Other statistics that we often hear from our tribal police, as well as police across the nation, that it's anywhere from 74% to over 90% of an experience of methamphetamine, and 40 to 50% involved in violent crimes. I know my personal experience in that area with the state patrol was that was much higher than that in terms of the violent crimes that we were investigating at a higher rate than the 50% outlined in this page. And then specifically, some tribes across the nation have experienced a great deal of problems with child welfare cases and increased use of methamphetamine in their community. So how do we go about helping beyond the website? We have our co-executive directors, Dr. Lisicich and Dr. Schmidt-Whalen, that personally visit states across the nation to work with community stakeholders community professionals to develop strategies and practices that can meet their local needs. And we currently have opened and are operating a regional center in Hawaii and are looking for other partners across the nation that will be able to help build out that same capacity. So some of the highlights of what we can offer from the National Center. We are based in community mobilization, or what we like to refer to as building out the collective efficacy of neighborhoods and communities to combat crime and drug abuse, to be empowered to make a difference. Strong partnerships with law enforcement is key, and also want to highlight a family services treatment model that has been showing signs of success for methamphetamine treatment. The first one page that will be on your website under the prevention work is the tools to organize. So you can go through our website and look at a step-by-step process that will help you bring your residents and stakeholders together for the common good of your community. And so without having to reinvent the wheel, this will provide the capacity to not only build out a committed multidisciplinary group of stakeholders, but one that will be sustained over time so that can have a long-term lasting effects in terms of policy and delivery of services and even funding issues as those become critical to maintain continuity in services. With law enforcement, we want to make sure there's a focused effort on multi-agency or multi-partner task forces. We often read about the stories where it takes a large number of resources, agency personnel due to jurisdictional issues, to have federal, state, local, and tribal teams working together to solve the more entrenched drug trafficking organizations that have a strong hold in our communities. Law enforcement again needs and it continues to work with communities at the grassroots level, where officers, detectives are front and center with our community members, helping to provide solutions and respond to their individual and neighborhood community needs. We want to make sure our law enforcement has first responder training so that, like with any emergency, keep that issue from getting worse. And we know that showing up at a meth lab has a high level of danger in terms of the explosive capacity or the gases that are emitted during production of methamphetamine. So our officers need to be trained in that response to secure it and call for the clandestine lab response teams that are properly equipped to respond to a lab and secure it safely. And that's the expensive and intensive use of personnel time. So having the resources from multi-agencies to team up is important to keep that sustained effort of trained personnel as a viable community element. Law enforcement is also involved in legislation that should be helping to control the sale of cold medicines that are available over the counter, or other legislation related to enhanced penalties for methamphetamine manufacture, a number of legislative issues that should be looked at locally. And then again, drug endangered children protocols, so that those first critical moments of a 2-year-old that's at the home of a drug methamphetamine manufacturer, where guns and drugs are easily available, it's critical to capture the emotional well-being of that child as they get transferred to those that can provide short and long-term care. Drug courts, we've had good success, great success with drug courts, and because of the holistic and multi generational impact they can have with the family, so that we're able to more effectively restore the child children to their homes, so they're staying with their mom and dad. And we have found a much higher unification rate for individuals going through family drug court. Here the local experience here in Washington State, specifically Pierce County, our family unification rate is over 85% in Pierce County, and 76% and 92% in other counties that are practicing family drug court, and similar successes across the U.S. So what's next? Expanding the website to so it's providing more information relevant to states as well as the national overview. Creating the new regional centers. So we're in Hawaii, but we're looking at other states currently, meeting with key stakeholders, officials, and advocates of prevention and treatment and law enforcement that understand the value of having these long-term sustained efforts in their state. So at the end of the day, we're working with you and available to help as you feel best can meet your needs. So with that, I thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name when prompted.
Stacy, this is Beth. I just want to let you know that we're going to hold questions until the end now. Our first presenter was not able to stay on the line, but the rest of the presenters will. So if people have questions, if they could hold those till the end, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate it. The National Methamphetamine Training and Technical Assistance Center is going to be an important resource for this country as we go forward, helping communities develop comprehensive strategies. So thank you for your presentation. We now are going to introduce two speakers who will be doing a joint presentation on meth problems and the effects in Indian country. Dr. Jamie Bartkus and Cipriano Lucario will be our presenters. Dr. Bartkus completed her PhD in clinical psychology at Oklahoma State University, an APA pre-doctoral internship at the University of South Florida, Florida Mental Health Institute, with a focus on mental health policy. She's an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma and has spent the last 10 years providing behavioral health services to both tribal and urban Indian individuals and communities. She is currently the Director of Technical Assistance and Research at the National Council of Urban Indian Health. She served 3 years in clinical practice at the Indian Healthcare Resource Center of Tulsa prior to coming to NCUIH. As a part of her practice in Tulsa, she coordinated the SAMHSA Circles of Care grant with the Tulsa Urban Indian Community, co-chair of the Tribal State Relations Working Group through Oklahoma. Governor Brad Henry's she served with Governor Brad Henry's Mental Health Transformation Advisory Board, and she's had the honor of working with countless Indian youth and families throughout the country. Mr. Cipriano Lucario is a Navajo Sicilian, earned a BA in Public Administration from San Diego State University in 1999, and an MA in Counseling Psychology at the California School of Professional Psychology in 2002. Mr. Lucario was born and raised in San Francisco and spent summers with his great-grandparents in New Mexico with relatives throughout the Navajo Reservation. Mr. Lucario has dedicated 15 years of professional development to work with American Indian youth throughout the state of California, and multiple levels of incarceration and community health centers, higher education institutions, and American Indian communities. In addition to providing direct clinical services, Mr. Lucario has worked with various youth serving agencies to bring about systemic change to improve the behavioral health care for Native youth in California. He currently works for the National Indian Health Board in Washington, D.C. as the Behavioral Health Program Coordinator. Jamie and Cipriano, we welcome you. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for this opportunity to share some of our organization's work and some of the things that are going on in Indian country. Good afternoon, everybody. First, we'll start with a little bit about our agencies that are here in D.C. that are providing technical assistance support. And assisting with the development of resources across Indian country. National Indian Health Board, our vision is to advocate on behalf of all tribal governments, American Indians, and Alaskan Natives in their efforts to provide quality health care. I won't read the slide verbatim, but really a lot of our work focuses on advocacy, policy formation, and analysis, direct and timely communication with tribes to get a solid feedback loop to develop platforms of advocacy and support, and really program development and assessment and training and technical assistance for project management.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamie Barges. I'm with the National Council of Urban Indian Health, and we are the sister organization to the National Indian Health Board. So we are really the other arm of the National Indian Health Board, in that we serve all of the urban Indian communities, or the urban Indian health programs. We actually are a membership-based organization, and we have 37 urban Indian health programs across the country, and we also provide advocacy here on Capitol Hill, as well as provide direct technical assistance support with a real focus on improving our urban Indian health program's capacity to provide quality and comprehensive care to American Indian people that are living in the cities. Currently, a little over 60%, or as of U.S. Census 2000, a little over 60% of natives did live in cities across the United States, which is the majority of the population, and we're waiting to see what happens with Census 2010. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about some of the data currently, and I know you heard a little bit of this in the last presentation, and some of it is similar, but there's a few other things that I'll point out. We do have the highest rate of any ethnic minority group in the country in terms of use of meth abuse. We also have, this is a major threat to our tribal police as well as our social service workers, with a number of studies that were conducted both by the BIA, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and then testimony that was given to the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs through some of our tribal communities. But you'll see from the slide here that we do have meth as one of the greatest problems that's really affecting our communities, and even our social service workers are indicating that meth is playing a large role in the neglect cases that we've been seeing in Indian country, as well as the placement of children into foster care. We also, the current reality of resources is a huge issue. For those of you, I don't know exactly who else on the call, but for those of you who don't know much about the Indian Health Services, broadly, this is the major entity that's responsible for providing health care as a part of treaty obligation to American Indian people, citizens of the sovereign nations within the U.S. And the agency itself is functioning on about less than 60% of what they need to be able to provide just basic, adequate care. So we're already functioning with very, very limited resources. Unfortunately, many of our tribal communities that are distributed meth treatment dollars, they're running out of those funds before the end of the year. So we kind of have it's an unfortunate joke in Indian country about don't get sick before a certain time, because there may not be any money until the next fiscal year, and that is the reality that many of our communities are dealing with. So I'm going to turn this over to Cipriano. We're going to tag team this, but he's going to give you a real example of how this is playing out in Indian country. So I'm going to turn this over to him now, and he'll take over.
So with our presentation, we really wanted to paint a picture of the meth problem and how it's affected American Indians, and we weren't sure of all the bases of our audience. So we developed this workshop or this presentation really starting from the ground up and starting to paint a picture that looks at maybe the last 20 years. So in this slide, we are developing current news articles, and what we're going to do is relate the current news articles and situations as an example to talk about methamphetamines. So in most of our slides, you will see two pieces. One left would be more data-orientated or information-based resources, and the second, or the right side, will be focused on examples that related to the specific articles that are talking about methamphetamine use and abuse and selling and the negative aspects of it on Native American reservations. So to begin, we're going to start by talking about the first experience. It's been known now for quite some time that Mexican drug cartels have identified Native reservations and reservation communities as excellent places to peddle substances and methamphetamines. In 2005, I believe, a jury found the Augusta Cruz and 22 others guilty and were given prison time up to life sentences for distributing more than 99 pounds of meth, primarily on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. This had an estimated street value of $4.5 million to $6.8 million, and there was links that this cartel had links to Rosebud, Pine Ridge, Yankton Sioux reservations in South Dakota, and the Santee Sioux reservations of Nebraska. In 2000, the Augusta Cruz and his drug cartel moved in near the Wind River Reservation. They were targeting Indian women, providing them free meth, and often having relationships and boring children with them. Once they were addicted, the women had to support their own habits, and the cartel used the women to distribute to the community. Basically like a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme in the sense of looking at how drugs are going to be marketed within the community. This idea or concept of the drug cartel really came out of reading newspaper articles talking about the distribution of alcohol in communities that were surrounded by dry reservation areas. So when they read this article and saying that there was high amounts of money being spent in short periods of time on a calendar year, they really took emphasis and started to create an idea of how to tap into those resources and basically sell methamphetamines. This map right here is from Frontline in 2006, and it talks about the meth epidemic spread across the United States from the data they were collecting from residential treatment centers for methamphetamines. The number of meth users in rehabs per 100,000 in the States in 2003, and it showed the spread as it moved to the East Coast. We decided to choose this slide and this next slide to relate, and this one's a little hard to see because it's not so zoomed in, but if you notice, a lot of the reservations in the United States are in the border east regions and the southwest and around the Canadian border. So if you look back to this slide right here, the dark blue is 51 or more, which means the highest percentage of per 100,000 state residents that were in residential treatment for meth abuse, and how it relates specifically to the areas of the Native American communities and reservations. Geographical attraction. 41 tribes have lands within 100 miles of the U.S. borders. We know for a fact that the majority of meth distributed in tribal communities is smuggled across U.S. borders. For anybody who hasn't been to Native community or reservation aspects, they're vast, remote, isolated lands. And more than 85% of the meth in the U.S. comes from California and Mexico. Mexican drug rings often use safe houses on reservations to distribute within the infrastructure they have in place within the United States. Law enforcement is strained and underfunded, and communities have limited technology and resources. So for our example, when we look at the Wind River and the Mexican cartel, in 4 years, more than 99 pounds of 98% pure meth was imported from Mexico, which made it to L.A., and then for that specific cartel, their main boss was in Ogden, Utah. And from Ogden, Utah, it was distributed to the Indian communities around there, trickling in all aspects of Wyoming. To talk about the geographical attraction, you look at the Wind River, which has 12,000 citizens of the northern Arapaho and eastern Shoshone people that live on 2.2 million acres. So the average police response time, and that's average police response time, is 15 to 20 minutes, and obviously that could be more or less depending on what night of the week it is or where they're at with their workforce. Social attractions with methamphetamines in the Indian communities. Unfortunately, a lot of our Native communities have high rates of poverty. Education, it fluctuates depending on the community. Unemployment rates are high, and alcoholism is prevalent. Our example with Wind River, and these are stats that were in 1998, which correlate to the 2000 movement of the drug cartel and the next 4 years of craziness that kind of came out of it. In 1998, 3 out of 5 families, 56% of them lived in poverty in 1998. 70% of the households were unemployed. 45% of the population had dropped out before graduating high school. And again, this kind of relates to that inspired article in the Denver Post, which got the cartel to thinking of how they could peddle or market their drugs to certain communities. The impact on the Wind River after 4 years of basically targeted meth sales. From 2003 to 2006, cases of child neglect increased 131%. Drug possession increased 163%. Spousal abuse rose 218%. In 2005, a tribal judge was arrested in a drug ring bust and accused of trying to assault and murder a BIA law enforcement officer. Between 2000 and 2005, the number of methamphetamine contacts at IHS services facilities increased by almost 250%. And remember, they're being basically funded at about a 60% need and run out of funds before the end of the fiscal year. There are few to no methamphetamine treatment facilities to respond to this crisis. We looked at enforcement issues. And with tribal communities and sovereignty, there's a lot of rights that are protected, a lot of rights that are wanted, and a lot of rights that are consistently being looked at for adjustments. The history of enforcement has some huge gaps. And again, not knowing our audience, we just took two of the primary enforcement components within the Supreme Court that looked at how do natives enforce the laws that are on their communities or within their communities, especially to maybe non-native people or visitors who are on reservations break the law. These two court cases and these two short sentences not do these rulings justice in the sense that they're sharing what they're all about, but maybe if you're really interested, you could use these links to kind of just go and do a little bit of homework to look at the history of enforcement in tribal communities. Today's enforcement is definitely different, and again, these are only recommendations that are made, and they're trying to develop sovereignty-friendly solutions to the checkerboarding of jurisdiction that's going on today. The International Association of Chiefs Police strongly recommends cross-deputization agreements, giving tribal police and their neighboring counterparts the power to act as agents for each other. This is still growing and fairly new, and they're still sorting out, maybe even with the tribal courts, of who has jurisdiction, of trying to figure out how to remify some of the situations or some of the crimes that are committed on the reservations. Tribal policing and law enforcement. Tribal law enforcement is in a state of crisis. Some communities have such high rates of, some have extremely high per capita crime rates. Officers are generally high school students or law enforcement academy graduates, and a slight majority of those police officers that are working are Native American. In addition, they face complex web of jurisdictional issues, as we briefly talked about and discussed, and they may not be able to arrest someone on one side of the road but not the other. Like, that's the realities of policing in tribal communities. Data suggests that tribes have far fewer resources than non-tribal communities, while at the same time they experience a violent crime rate more than double the national average. And furthermore, tribal communities have much smaller police to citizen ratio than communities with comparable policing needs. Complicating matters, many tribal communities have an antagonistic relationship with tribal law enforcement officials. The American Indian response.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and finish out the end of the presentation by talking to you a little bit about what our communities have been doing to respond to these issues. As you've heard from what Cipriano has just presented, you know, we are in a pretty unfortunate situation in terms of some of our communities really being targeted for methamphetamine distribution. And, you know, if you'll notice from our title, we talked about how the United States problem, methamphetamine problem, is affecting Indian country, and that is where we are with things, is that it is coming into our communities in unfortunate ways. But one of the things that we've seen is that our communities have started to step up and respond. And one of the things that we're certainly noticing about those that are really making an impact in meth addiction and meth treatment within their communities are those that do it as a collective. And we're seeing communities really come together, all facets of communities, whether it be our grandmas and grandpas, our young people, our law enforcement officers, our social service folks, our tribal courts, you know, everyone coming together to make sure that this issue is addressed in a large way. And I'm going to show you just one little example of some of the things that are coming out. And, you know, I'll show you a little bit about the community awareness work that's being done, because it is critical for us to target our communities directly. So if you'll just watch here for a moment, I'll show you a very quick 30-second little video.
share.
Amy, it's not showing, the video isn't showing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I'm sorry that you're not able to see that then. Well, we had it added, and we thought we checked it out before the presentation. Well, you can click on it and check out that particular link. But one of the things that we really wanted to make sure is that you had an idea about some of the things that were coming out. So if you get a chance after the presentation, go ahead and click on that and take a look at some of the things that our communities are doing. So, as we talk about the response, the response is really at multiple levels. We definitely are having a law and policy response because some of the jurisdictional issues, especially that Cipriano talked about, are very critical for us to really take a look at and make sure that our federal law and our federal policies are conducive to making sure that we have healthy communities and that we're preventing some of these kinds of things from affecting our communities in the way that they have been. So there's a lot of things that have been happening nationally. You can see a couple of a few things that have come out. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail of this because of time, but we are working, and I know the National Congress of American Indians as well as the National Indian Health Board and my organization, the National Council of Urban Indian Health, are all working to really make sure that laws and policies surrounding all of these issues with Indian country are conducive to our Indian communities in terms of what the needs are. Here's a little example of some of the things that we're doing in terms of the national Indian organizations and how we're really focusing on various aspects of the work that needs to be done. With the National Indian Health Board and the National Council of Urban Indian Health, we, of course, are looking at laws and policies that support effective prevention, treatment, and recovery programs for methamphetamine in both tribal and urban communities. The National Congress of American Indians focuses on the tribal government response as sovereign tribal governments to be able to respond in a way that not only dealing with community awareness and education, but also related laws and policies to make sure that when those jurisdictional issues come up with law enforcement between tribal law enforcement officers and federal or state enforcement officers, that those laws and policies are conducive to making sure that people are safe and protected. The National Indian Housing Council really focuses on what's happening within the actual housing units, the Indian housing units, and the meth labs. The National Indian Child Welfare Association, that's supposed to be association, not initiative. The National Indian Child Welfare Association is focused on related policies for children in foster care. That's related to the horrible increase that we've been seeing in child neglect cases. So just to let you know, I'm not going to do give you all the information about the things that have been happening. But one of the things that I said in the beginning is that what we're seeing from our communities is a very collective response. And as a part of that, we're seeing our communities really get back to the grassroots of doing things where they're building programs from the culture up. And we're really seeing that there's been a shift in thinking about care. And we're finding that our communities that are really trying to address this, not just at the evidence-based treatment level, although that's a piece of it, they're also addressing it at the spiritual level, at the emotional level, and at the physical level, as well as at the mental health level. So we're seeing our communities come together with treatment programs that are multifaceted, even more so than what you see in typical communities. So, and again, I'm not going to go ahead and click on these links just in case they don't come up because I don't want to waste anyone's time. But here's some examples of some social marketing campaign that was done, the Indian Country Methamphetamine Initiative, that allowed a lot of social marketing materials to go out that were specific to American Indian Alaska Native communities. These are very critical for us to really engage our communities. The broad meth campaigns, oftentimes our community members won't necessarily look at those and think, oh, that's about me. So it's really important for us to really focus on getting our communities to have a voice in the education and awareness campaigns that are happening around the community. The Methamphetamine and Suicide Prevention Initiative is a project that Cipriano and I both serve as the technical assistance support providers. There's 129 communities across the country, both tribal and urban Indian communities, that have been awarded dollars to affect either methamphetamine and or suicide, and those two unfortunately often run together, as do many of our substance addictions and suicide within Indian country. So we have 129 grantees that are in the process now of implementing various prevention and intervention and recovery support programs. One of the things that's coming out of that pretty soon, we expect that to be rolling out around September, is that we've actually sent out a youth social marketing competition so that we will allow young people the opportunity to really develop all the national campaign materials. So we're really excited about the opportunity to give our young people a voice about the kinds of messaging that's needed that's strength-based to reach them in a way that's going to affect their use of methamphetamine within Indian country. As you can see here, there are a number of different prevention types of things that are happening around the country. We just gave you a little snapshot here. There are so many different prevention initiatives. Some of them are specifically targeting meth. Some of them are targeting meth as a part of other related factors or other related substances. And then a lot of them will even integrate substance addiction prevention or substance prevention work with suicide prevention work, because again, those two seem to be pretty closely related within our particular communities. So as you can see here, there are actual American Indian Alaska Native developed prevention curriculums. Some of these are on SAMHSA's INREP as an evidence-based practice. I know the American Indian Life Skills curriculum is. The Gathering of Native Americans, the GONA, has had a lot of really great outcome data, although I don't know that it's been really published to the extent that it should, but I do know that they're getting quite a bit of, they're using it in different places around the country and getting some good outcomes from it. The Native Hope is another suicide prevention piece that also brings in substance abuse prevention as well. So we've got these Native prevention curriculums that have been developed. There are others. These aren't exhaustive. We also are seeing a lot of community-based cultural programs, and I just gave you a couple of projects there. One's from my tribal community, Use Your Marbles, Not Methamphetamine. That's coming out of Cherokee Nation, where we have elders in our community that are teaching young people our traditional game of marbles, as well as talking about issues related to substance abuse, as well as positive life skills and coping skills. And then the Project PI, which is coming out of the San Francisco Urban Indian Health Program in the Friendship House. The Project PI is really an incredible program that allows young people to start to explore their identity. And our urban Indian youth sometimes struggle with identity because of being so isolated in the city and so far away from their tribal communities that they may not be picking up some of the lessons that we might like them to have, or that they might need to have in terms of understanding their identity and who they are. So Project PI is an urban-specific intervention that really kind of helps our Native youth living in the cities. And then we also have community social gatherings. And some people don't really see these as prevention, but these are prevention in our community. They're natural prevention mechanisms that have been there from the beginning of time. Our powwows, our drum groups, our community dinners, our community sporting events. And when we have a basketball tournament, the whole community comes out. And these are forums for us to be speaking about health and wellness, and you'll often hear messages of various aspects of health that will be coming over the loudspeaker, and oftentimes we'll have vendors and booths set up with material at these community events. And for us, these are prevention. And then with treatment, you'll see a whole host of things from evidence-based practices to evidence-based practices that have been adapted to in Indian country. For example, if you'll see on this list, the matrix model. There are some communities that have started to adapt the matrix model to work within their communities by incorporating cultural beliefs and practices into the treatment itself. You'll also see what we call practice-based evidence models, and these are programs that are or processes that have been in place in our communities for a very long time that have been showing positive results. They've just never been documented, and nobody's had a R01 NIH research grant to document their effectiveness, but these are things that our communities have been doing for quite some time. We see both culturally based residential treatment centers coming up within our tribal and urban Indian communities, as well as culturally based outpatient programs that are really building on culture, and then they pull in the evidence-based practices as a part of the core cultural infrastructure that they have set in place for the programs. And then the last thing that we really have to talk about in terms of the types of treatment that that needs to take place is community-wide treatment. For many of our communities, these things, you know, when you're in such a small community, and even in urban settings, we're so small, there's so few of us that we often all know each other, that when you're in such a small community, it does make it really difficult because you know everybody. So if you have something like the Wind River Reservation where you've had someone come in and is just really, it just spread like a cancer, then before long, the whole community is affected. It's either your niece or your nephew or your mom or your sibling or whatever, and the whole community is so intimately affected that we oftentimes have to do entire community healing processes. So you'll see here a few examples of some communities who have really taken the initiative to start communities coming together and engaging in ceremonies and practices and things that allow them that opportunity to start the healing as a collective community. It also serves as community education and awareness. In addition, because a lot of these people are out and they're doing a lot of community campaigning and education and awareness throughout the community. So these are really critical pieces to the work that needs to be done as this collective community healing. So with future directions, you know, one of the things that we're going to have to continue to work on is this is such a huge issue that has affected our communities. And for us, it's like we're going to have to really impact this on multiple levels. So, you know, it's not just about looking at the practice level and documenting our best practices and making sure that we have culturally respectful treatment programs. But it's also about building an infrastructure that allows us to sustain those programs, making sure that our laws and our policies, as well as, you know, the funding opportunities and the policies that are in place, are supportive of the work that we're doing in a way that's going to allow us to do it in a way that makes sense culturally and for the context of the community. And then we also have to continue all this community engagement, because our communities, again, as we're seeing, the ones who are really moving forward with some really great work are those who are engaging the entire community. So really, community education mobilization is key for Indigenous people who are, you know, oftentimes pretty tight-knit communities. And then we also have to start figuring out about these crisis response teams and having some mechanism in place to be able to respond when a crisis does arise. We're seeing this both with when there's a meth lab that's been identified, particularly with jurisdictional issues and cleanup, for who's responsible for cleanup when you've got jurisdictional issues within the reservation communities. But also we're seeing this in other facets in terms of crisis response for suicide. And unfortunately, again, those two things go hand in hand, so it's difficult for us to talk about substance addiction without also talking about the impact of people's heart and the impact of their, you know, mind on things like depression and suicide. So again, we want to thank you all for being here and allowing us the opportunity to give you a little bit of information about what's happening within Indian country because of the U.S. meth issue. We know that this isn't exhaustive. We had 20 minutes to present. There are a lot of other things that we may be able to provide resources to folks for. So we've got our contact information up here. If you have tribal-specific questions, you can certainly contact Cipriano. If you have any urban Indian health-specific questions, I can refer you to the resources that are available. You can contact me. And again, we're just very thankful that you guys gave us the opportunity to present, and we're honored to be here to be able to present with these great speakers and would be willing to entertain any questions.
Jamie and Cipriano, thank you very much. This was a very informative presentation, a lot of new information, some exciting things going on, and I hope the group will take advantage of your offer to follow up with questions. I'll turn it back over to Ed now as we close out for preparing questions.
Thanks, Jim. I'd also like to thank our speakers for their expertise and exceptional insight into the topics discussed today. We'd now like to open the floor for any additional questions. Stacy, will you please explain the process once again to pose a question and open the lines?
Thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your touch-tone phone and record your name when prompted. If you need to withdraw your question, press *2. Again, to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. It will take a few moments for the questions to register. Please stand by.
Thank you, Stacy. While we're waiting, I would also like to let everyone know that if you look at your screen in the top right-hand corner, there is an icon that looks like 3 pieces of paper overlapping each other. If you click on that icon, there are PDF copies of each of the presentations for today, as well as we were able to post the links that in Jamie's presentation that you were not able to see. We went in and posted those as PDF copies there as well. If that is helpful to you. We also, as a reminder, will have that information available at www.methpedia.org, the whole presentation as well as those PDF documents.
And I'm showing no questions from the phones at this time.
All right. That will complete our time here today. We would like to thank all of you who have participated in today's webinar. And as Beth just said, to download previous webinars and this one and handouts from this series, please visit www.methpedia.org/summit. Thank you for participating in today's webinar.
That does conclude today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.